Most people think they know the story of the man from Nazareth, but they overlook the fact that a single carpenter from a dusty village managed to dismantle the moral foundation of the greatest empire in history without ever picking up a sword. You might know his name, but you likely haven't realized how the specific words he spoke in a tiny corner of the Middle East became the very bricks and mortar used to build Western civilization as we know it today. In the next 13 minutes, we're going to look past the stained glass windows and the Sunday school stories to find the man who walked the dirt paths of ancient Judea between 5 BC and 30 AD. We will explore how a person with no military rank, no political office, and no wealth became the most influential figure to ever live. This isn't just a story about religion. It is a deep dive into a historical turning point. That redefined what it means to be human, how we treat our enemies, and why our modern world looks the way it does. We are going to unravel the mystery of how a humble builder from a forgotten town became the central figure of human history. To understand the man, we must first understand the world that shaped him. Imagine a land under the heavy boot of the Roman Empire. By the time Jesus was born, around 5 BC, Judea was a pressure cooker of tension and longing. The Romans, led by the distant Emperor Augustus, were masters of order and taxation, but their presence was a constant sting to the Jewish people. The locals weren't just looking for a teacher, they were looking for a deliverer. They wanted a warrior king, someone in the mold of King David, who would drive the legions back into the sea and restore the glory of Israel. This was a world where life was cheap and power was everything. In the shadows of the Roman eagles, different groups within Jewish society were fighting for the soul of the people. You had the Pharisees, obsessed with religious law, and the Sadducees, the elite who managed the temple. And then you had the Zealots, the revolutionaries who hid daggers under their cloaks, waiting for the right moment to strike a Roman soldier. It was into this atmosphere of high-stakes politics and desperate hope that Jesus arrived. When we think of grand historical figures, we usually think of palaces in Rome or libraries in Athens. But this story begins in Nazareth, a small, dusty village in the hills of Galilee. So insignificant that people used to joke, "Can anything good come from Nazareth?" It was a place for laborers and farmers, far away from the intellectual and political centers of Jerusalem. Jesus spent the vast majority of his life here, working as a tekton. While we often translate this as carpenter, the Greek word suggests a general builder or craftsman. He likely worked with wood, stone, and metal. He knew the weight of a heavy beam, the roughness of unhewn rock, and the exhaustion of a long day's work. This connection to the common man is vital. He wasn't an aristocrat looking down, he was a worker looking out. His hands were weathered, his skin was tanned by the Mediterranean sun, and his perspective was forged in the reality of everyday survival. Around the age of 30, he laid down his tools and walked away from the workbench. He stepped into the public eye, forever changing the course of his life and ours. The public ministry of Jesus didn't start in a palace, but at a river. After being baptized by his cousin, John the Baptist, Jesus began to travel. He didn't stay in the synagogues, he went to the people. He called a group of followers who, on paper, made no sense. He chose rough-handed fishermen like Peter and Andrew, and even a tax collector named Matthew. A man who would have been hated by his own people for working for the Romans. This ragtag group of 12 became his inner circle, the primary witnesses to a message that would soon set the region on fire. His teaching was a shock to the system. In his famous Sermon on the Mount, Jesus stood on a hillside and turned the world upside down. He didn't say, "Blessed are the powerful," or "Blessed are the rich." Instead, he said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit," and "Blessed are the peacemakers." He took the old law of an eye for an eye and replaced it with something far more difficult. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. This wasn't just a religious suggestion, it was a radical social ethic. He argued that the kingdom of God was a transformation of the human heart lived out through mercy and humility. As Jesus moved from village to village, his reputation exploded. It wasn't just his words that drew the crowds, it was his actions. He became known as a healer who didn't care about social boundaries. In the ancient world, if you had leprosy, you were an outcast, forced to live outside the city walls. But Jesus did the unthinkable. He reached out and touched them. He healed the blind, the lame, and the broken. But the real miracle was his willingness to restore their dignity. He performed signs that spoke to his authority over the natural world, calming storms on the Sea of Galilee, or feeding thousands from a few loaves and fish. But these weren't just magic tricks for show. Each act was a message. By feeding the hungry, he was showing his role as a provider. By calming the storm, he was showing that he offered peace in the midst of chaos. He used these moments to challenge the rigid social ladders. He ate with sinners and spoke with women in public, breaking every social taboo to show that every human soul carried equal, infinite value. Success always brings enemies, and for Jesus, the enemies were the people who had the most to lose. The religious leaders in Jerusalem were deeply disturbed by him. To them, he was a loose cannon. He healed people on the Sabbath, arguing that the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. He claimed to have the authority to forgive sins, something they believed only God could do. But the biggest threat was his popularity. Thousands were following him, and in a land occupied by Rome, large crowds usually meant a riot was coming. The tension reached a breaking point during the Passover festival. When Jesus entered the city on a donkey, the crowds went wild, waving palm branches and shouting for a king. To the Romans, this looked like an insurrection. To the temple elite, this was a direct challenge. The stage was set for a confrontation that had been building for 3 years. The final days of Jesus' life were a masterclass in quiet resilience. On a Thursday evening, he gathered his closest friends for one last meal. This wasn't just a dinner, it was a symbolic handover of his mission. He took bread and wine and told them to remember him through these simple elements, establishing what would become the central ritual of the faith. But even in this intimate moment, the shadow of betrayal was present. One of his own, Judas Iscariot, had already struck a deal to hand him over to the authorities for 30 pieces of silver. After the meal, Jesus went to a place called Gethsemane, an olive grove. This is one of the most human moments in the narrative. We see a man in deep agony, sweating as if he were bleeding. He wasn't a stoic statue, he was a man who felt the full weight of fear and loneliness. When the soldiers arrived, Jesus didn't fight back. He stopped his disciples from using their swords. He famously stated that those who live by the sword will die by it. He surrendered, allowing himself to be led into a night of illegal trials and mockery. The trials of Jesus were a farce of justice. He was bounced between the high priest Caiaphas, the Roman governor Pontius Pilate, and King Herod Antipas. No one could find a legitimate crime, yet no one wanted to let him go and risk a riot. Pilate found himself in a strange position, trying to wash his hands of the affair. The religious leaders accused Jesus of blasphemy, while the political charge to Rome was sedition, claiming to be a king. Throughout the beatings and the insults, Jesus remained largely silent. He didn't beg for his life or try to argue his way out. He accepted the crown of thorns and the purple robe placed on him in mockery. Eventually, the pressure of the crowd became too much for Pilate. He ordered Jesus to be scourged and then executed by crucifixion, the most shameful and painful form of death the Roman Empire had ever devised. It was a punishment reserved for rebels and slaves, designed to be a public warning to anyone who dared to challenge the power of Rome. On a hill called Golgotha, the man from Nazareth was nailed to a wooden cross. To any outside observer at the time, this was the end of the story. Another tragic figure crushed by the machinery of empire. As he hung there, Jesus uttered, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Even at the point of death, he stayed true to his message of radical, unconditional forgiveness. His death was recorded as occurring around 3 in the afternoon. The sky reportedly turned dark. A Roman centurion standing guard was moved to say, "Truly, this man was the Son of God." His body was taken down and placed in a tomb owned by Joseph of Arimathea. A stone was rolled across the entrance. The Roman authorities placed a seal on it to prevent tampering. For his followers, it was a moment of absolute despair. Their leader was dead, their hopes were shattered, and they were in hiding, fearing they would be next. But the story didn't end at the tomb. Whether viewed through the lens of faith or history, what happened next is undeniable. Something transformed these frightened, hiding disciples into the most bold messengers. They began to claim that Jesus had risen from the dead and had appeared to them over 40 days. They took this message to the streets of Jerusalem, the corners of the Roman Empire, and to the ends of the earth. Within a few decades, what began as a small group became a diverse movement that crossed every ethnic and social line. The message of Jesus reached the halls of power in Rome and the mud huts of tribal Europe. By the time the Roman Empire collapsed, the faith built on the teachings of this executed carpenter had become the foundation of the New World. It provided the moral language for the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, and the ethical framework for the modern concept of human rights. When we look at the world today, the fingerprints of Jesus are everywhere. The idea that every individual has inherent worth comes directly from his teachings. The concept of charity on a global scale, the establishment of hospitals, and the push for universal education all have their roots in the followers of Jesus trying to live out his command to love their neighbours. His parables, like the Good Samaritan and the Prodigal Son, have become part of our collective DNA, teaching us about compassion and second chances. Even for those who do not follow him religiously, Jesus remains the ultimate philosopher of the heart. He challenged us to look at our own flaws before pointing out the flaws in others. He taught us that true greatness is found in serving others. He was a man of peace in a time of war, a man of truth in a time of corruption, and a man of love in a time of hate. His life is a testament to the fact that a single person, armed with a revolutionary idea, can indeed change the world forever. Subscribe to History Memory Chronicles for historical deep dives. Like, share, and comment.